Gene and I were dating. We had a close friend, and he died in a car wreck at 19 years of age, and it was absolutely awful. He burned alive in the wreck. They couldn't get him out, and I went to the parents' house. He was a single child, and the father was crushed and broken, and he couldn't ask. He wanted to ask me to be a pallbearer, and he couldn't get the words out without collapsing. And I left there, and then I had strange new feelings I hadn't really felt before. It's like, man, I've just lost something huge, and it's never coming back, and I'm not sure how to deal with this. So that would probably be the first time I would say it had a major impact and actually changed the way that I think. I guess I realized I'm not immortal. He's 19. He's dead. I'm 20, 21. I could be dead too. And because it was such an awful way to go, there was never a body to look at. You know how you often go and look at the body at the funeral? I never saw him dead. And so there were lingering thoughts for years because there was never that closure of actually seeing my buddy deceased. So that was probably the first time. You?
Well, for myself, very young, we probably the loss of pets. I think all kids, if you have pets, you go through that. I remember one of my first dog that I can really remember. We lived on a highway. The dog gets out, and as you know, the cars aren't too friendly when the dog gets in the road. And
no,
anyway,
I'm already laughing at your loss, Kurt. This is wrong. But
and you lose a pet, and so
yeah.
and I think when it comes to death, I remember my sister had a close friend. In fact, she would visit at her house. And I was probably 8, 9 years old, and that schoolmate of my sister passed away. And so my mom, because we all knew her and because of the circumstance, Mom said that all of us were going to go to that funeral. And I can still remember my brother and I. We lived out in kind of a desert area, and we were standing out in this field across from the house. A lot of sand, sagebrush, and we were bemoaning the fact that we had to go to this funeral, and it was our first experience. And I can still remember, the people crying, as you mentioned, open casket,
right? Everything
was just related to it, and I know for a number of days, it made me really think. I was very sad. It was overwhelming, to a youngster.
Sure.
But you begin to experience, like you say, loss and death, and it has an impact upon you.
Yeah, it does.
You mentioned moving. I can remember, too, when I was probably 12 years old, we moved from Washington State to Utah. I'd lived there. That's all I could remember. I'd been there probably about 10 years. So from 2 years old to 12. And, when you move that distance, you lose everything. It's like, okay, my friends, my cousins. And so it makes you feel pretty sad when that takes place.
Yeah.
But our study guide today, as we've mentioned, it deals with grief. It deals with stress that comes with grief and with loss.
Hey, let me let people know though if they're just joining us, Kurt. You've mentioned the study guide. We're going through that series, Peace is an Inside Job. You can get a copy of it by going to voiceofprophecy.com. Click on the store tab. Look for Bible studies. Peace is an Inside Job, so that you can go through this material yourself. That's what we're referring to here on the air, and we're on number 5, Power to Cope with Grief. So go ahead and take us into it.
Okay, Shawn. Well, our text today, our study, is found in 1 Kings chapter 17. I'm just going to review the intro that we find in the study guide and just give a few thoughts that we find here in the first few verses to set the stage.
Okay.
When we come to 1 Kings 17, Shawn, we find Ahab is the king of Israel. And as a king, he's rejected God. He's led his country into apostasy. His wife Jezebel's rebelled with him. She's so angry that she's decided it's time to murder the prophets of God.
Wow.
And one of these prophets was a man by the name of Elijah. And Elijah had become a very unpopular figure because he told Ahab, the king, that his punishment from God for rebellion and murder was that there would be no dew or rain in Israel for 3 years. It'd be this huge drought. And because of Elijah's message, his army were out looking for Elijah to kill him. But God protected him. He hid Elijah in a ravine east of the Jordan River. And you read in Scripture in 1 Kings chapter 17 And verse 4, that God speaks to Elijah, and he says, "And it will be that you shall drink from the brook." That was where he was sending him. "And I have commanded the ravens to feed you." So he, Elijah, went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and stayed by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So when you read this, you see God, getting involved in Elijah's life to take care of him. And before we just continue on in the story, Shawn, I'd like to pause here because in time of need, whether it's grief or other experiences of life, you sometimes wonder, am I going to be okay?
Right.
But we read here about God and the ravens. So what does that say to you as you read that in regards to
there's a few things
God
there.
himself?
This world is awful because we've made it an awful place, and we're going to look at that a little bit today. But what I find interesting here is that Elijah's a prophet of God, but he also has to go through the hard times with everybody else. He's not living in an oasis. He's not living in a resort hotel waiting for this famine to pass. But at the same time, his basic needs are being handled. God is sufficient.